Christian school in Canton, Ohio, suspended a boy for 202 days. They taught him hell was real, deviance was satanic, and fear the only language God understood. That boy was paying attention. By 1996, he had weaponized every one of those fears and fed them back to an entire nation. America built its own monster. The blueprint began in a classroom most people have never heard of. Fear ruled the Warner household. Barbara Warner's Pentecostal faith shaped every moment. No secular music, no horror films, no clothing that might tempt fate. The television was rationed, but the Bible was constant. Each day ended with scripture, each night with warnings about hell. Barbara's voice carried through the house, prayers at dinner, reminders that the devil watched, that hell was never far. Her husband, Hugh, a Vietnam veteran, moved quietly in the background, leaving discipline and doctrine to Barbara. The blinds stayed drawn, the world outside kept at bay. Questions about faith or rules met with silence, scripture, or punishment. For Brian, an only child, the message was clear. Obedience was survival. At Heritage Christian School, the pressure only intensified. The curriculum centered on sin and salvation, with daily pledges to the Christian flag and sermons that painted the world as a battlefield. The discipline log recorded a 202-day suspension for disruptive worship and parent-teacher conferences for rebellious questioning. Deviance was spiritual defiance. Corporal punishment was rarely needed. The threat alone kept most children quiet. Hell was not just a story. It was a lesson, a warning, a promise. Step out of line, and the cost was more than detention. It was damnation. In this world, fear became the blueprint for daily life. Every shadow hid the devil. Every question was a risk. The silence between prayers held the answer. Dread was the foundation, and escape was unthinkable. Brian Warner's escape plan began with a name. In 1989, the blueprint took shape. Marilyn for the doomed goddess, Manson for the cult butcher. The fusion wasn't just a stage name. It was a psychological weapon, a dare to the culture that raised him. Scott Putesky, a guitarist drawn to the same shadows, joined as co-conspirator. Together, they built the spooky kids in garages and half-empty clubs across Detroit and South Florida, testing the limits of discomfort like scientists running a live experiment. Early flyers promised death gothic performance art, not concerts. The band's first demo tapes, raw, abrasive, barely music, circulated through underground zines, each one a provocation. Warner painted inverted crosses on his face, wore drag-inspired makeup, and stalked the stage in torn fishnets. The message was clear: if America feared the forbidden, he would become its avatar. Audiences were baited into confusion, repulsed, drawn in, unable to decide if they were witnessing a joke, a threat, or a mirror held up to their own nightmares. Rehearsals blurred into ritual. Putesky and Warner debated which prosthetic scars or gender-bending costumes would land hardest. A latex wound on Warner's forehead, refined after every show, became a signature. After each performance, Warner polled the crowd. Did they feel disgust, arousal, or both? The answers shaped the next act, sharpening the spectacle into a scalpel. Zine reviews called it a sonic visual assault, a test of how far the audience would follow before turning away. The band's notoriety grew, not in spite of outrage, but because of it. In the spooky kids' laboratory, the monster was being designed to fit the shape of America's dread. The real experiment: how much fear did the country secretly want? Trent Reznor saw opportunity in the spectacle. In 1993, Nothing Records, a shadowy offshoot of Interscope, offered Brian Warner his first real contract. The ink dried on a deal that was less about music than about weaponizing discomfort. Reznor, already infamous for 9-inch nails, understood the currency of outrage. He handed Warner a budget that dwarfed what most underground acts could dream of, betting that America's appetite for fear could be monetized. Internal memos from the label spelled out the plan: amplify the controversy, chase the headlines, let the backlash drive the sales. The debut album, Portrait of an American Family, arrived in 1994. Its lead single, Get Your Gun, was a calculated provocation, a murder ballad dressed as a protest song. The video, grainy, lurid, impossible to ignore, landed in MTV's late-night rotation and sparked calls for bans before the first week's sales numbers even came in. Retailers reported a surge, especially in conservative towns, where local news warned parents to keep their children away. The controversy wasn't a side effect, it was the product. Reznor and Warner worked the machinery with cold precision. Shock became commerce. Each protest, each angry op-ed, became an ad campaign money couldn't buy. The monster was now mass-produced, shrink-wrapped, and shipped to every mall in America. The question was no longer if the culture would react, but how violently, and how much profit could be squeezed from the outrage. Antichrist Superstar detonated in October 1996, a record engineered not just to provoke, but to ignite a national fever. The album's concept offered a messiah for the damned, a figure who would tear down the altar of American piety and leave only spectacle and ash. On stage, Manson didn't just perform, he orchestrated a ritual. Nazi-style banners hung behind him. He ripped up Bibles, delivered sermons in preacher's robes, and staged mock crucifixions under blinding spotlights. Each city became a battleground. Evangelical leaders mobilized, denouncing the tour from pulpits and airwaves. Outside venues, protesters waved signs promising damnation, their prayers echoing against the rumble of tour buses. In Lubbock, Texas, and Dayton, Ohio, city officials offered cash buyouts, tens of thousands of dollars, to make the show disappear. Manson refused, knowing that every cancellation, every prayer vigil, was free advertising. Headlines multiplied. Local news anchors warned parents. National magazines debated whether the Antichrist had come to town. Sales spiked. The outrage wasn't a side effect. It was the engine. Manson had mapped the fault lines of American dread and pressed every button at once. The real horror wasn't on stage. It was in the mirror he held up to a country desperate for a monster to fear. And the more America recoiled, the bigger the monster grew. April 20th, 1999. The word Columbine scorched every news crawl, but within hours, the headlines had a new villain. Marilyn Manson's name appeared in a surge of LexisNexis hits, hundreds of articles, each more fevered than the last. National anchors, grasping for answers, found a ready-made monster. Politicians lined up on camera, demanding accountability from a singer most had never heard until that week. The machinery of blame spun at full speed, and Manson became the face of America's nightmare, a folk devil conjured from the country's own anxieties. Concerts vanished overnight. Denver, Salt Lake City, and other cities invoked morality clauses to cancel shows, citing public safety. MTV and major radio chains yanked Manson's music from rotation within days. Retailers pulled albums from shelves, as if plastic and cardboard could be quarantined like a virus. The band's public image shifted in an instant, from provocateur to alleged architect of violence. It did not matter that the shooters were not fans, or that police inventories turned up no evidence of Manson in their lives. The facts drowned in the roar. The real horror was not in the lyrics. It was in how quickly a nation could manufacture a scapegoat, then feed on its own creation. When the monster you built finally stares back, who is left holding the mirror? In 1998, Marilyn Manson shed his Antichrist skin and stepped onto the stage as Omega, the alien, the glam rock android, a being sculpted for a country addicted to spectacle but weary of the old outrage. The album Mechanical Animals arrived dressed in latex and neon, liner notes reading like a transmission from a planet where gender and pain were fluid. Critics saw a Bowie homage. Fans saw a new mask for the same monster. The shock was still there, but now it shimmered, less preacher, more fallen star. 2 years later, Hollywood dragged the persona back into the dirt, a self-authored American gospel about assassination, martyrdom, and the machinery that turns murderers into myths. Each reinvention wasn't escape, but adaptation. Manson's strategy was clear: mutate before the culture could inoculate itself. But as the headlines multiplied and lawsuits circled, the monopoly on fear began to slip. America's appetite had changed, but the architect kept building new monsters, always one step ahead of the next Inquisition. February 2021. The headlines shifted from spectacle to accusation. Evan Rachel Wood and several others filed civil complaints in Los Angeles, naming Brian Warner as their abuser. The legal language was cold and clinical: intentional infliction of emotional distress, sexual assault, fraud. Within days, Universal Music dropped Marilyn Manson from its roster. Streaming platforms added content advisories. MTV deleted archived performances. The monster that once stalked the stage was now summoned to the courtroom, his persona dissected in affidavits and press releases. Investigators from the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department opened a case. The public read fragments, text messages, sworn statements, timelines that blurred the line between performance and reality. In April 2023, Ashley Morgan Smithline, one of the primary accusers, filed a notarized affidavit recanting her claims, stating she had been pressured into her testimony. The district attorney's office declined to file criminal charges, citing insufficient evidence. No verdict, no closure, just an open wound. The engineered monster had become a legal phantom, haunting the space between accusation and exoneration. The fear, once manufactured for the stage, now lived in the ambiguity of the record. In America's hunger for monsters, the line between invention and reality had collapsed, leaving only questions that refused to settle. The real monster isn't on stage. It's the mirror Manson held to America's appetite for fear. Even as his power fades, the hunger for new villains never does. What we demonize reveals what we can't face. The next monster will be built from the same raw nerves. What scares us now?